Hello, everyone, and welcome. We'll be starting in a couple of minutes. Until then, make yourselves comfortable and do introduce yourselves in the chat. We'd love to know where you're joining from. So I see we have a few more people who have joined. We're just going to wait a couple more minutes until we start. Like I said, introduce yourselves in the chat. We'd love to know where you're from. All right, so hello everyone, and welcome to our discussion on circular economy and perspectives from industry. This is the fourth event in a series on better economics for climate change. So far, the sessions have discussed how neoclassical economics has dealt with climate change, imagined a different curriculum for environmental economics, and also looked at the policy landscape. I'm Tanya Thomas. I will be facilitating the session today. I'm a master's student in environmental policy at Sciences Po and working with an association called Climate Chance that works with non-state actors working for climate action. I'm very excited to be moderating this session, which also happens to be today on the 5th anniversary of the adoption of the Paris Agreement. I will start by introducing our very impressive panel. So first off, we have Pavithra Mohanraj, who is the co-founder of Infinitive, an advisory firm working to accelerate the adoption of circular economy in India through communications, capacity building, business advisory, and ecosystem development projects. She has over a decade of experience working in sustainability consulting and reporting, and also mentors startups in the circular economy space across Asia. We also have with us Aditya Siroya, who is the co-founder and chief impact officer at rePurpose Global, the world's first plastic credit platform. Since its inception, rePurpose has empowered waste workers and innovators to fund the removal of over 1.5 million pounds of plastic waste across Asia, Africa, and Latin America. Aditya is fueled by two passions: pushing ahead the charge for our future circular economy and baking pizza. We also have with us Pranshu Singhal, who is the co-founder of Karo Sambhav, which collaborates with enterprises and enables them to close their material loops by designing and implementing transformative extended producer responsibility programs for e-waste and plastic waste. He has worked internationally in the fields of sustainability and environmental management. We were supposed to have a fourth panelist, Bharati Chaturvedi from Chintan, who unfortunately introduced our panelists. We will move on to their opening statements without further ado. Pavithra, you have the floor.
Thank you, Tanya. I'm actually just congratulating myself for remembering to unmute before starting to speak. Welcome to everyone here. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm Pavi, founder of Infinitive, and as Tanya said, we do a bunch of things, but I think in the last few months, a lot of our focus has been on communications and capacity building. So I thought what might be useful for this conversation that's being run by Rethinking Economics was for me to sort of do like a big picture framing of how to think about the circular economy, and then leave my fellow panelists, Pranshu and Aditya, to do a lot of the heavy lifting and get into the brass tacks because they actually work on the ground way more than I do. So that's kind of what I think I'd like to do is just start out at the very beginning by talking about what the circular economy is. In the early days and continuing even until today, it's sort of misunderstood as recycling. But I think, and the reason why I'm really happy Rethinking Economics is having a conversation on circular economy is because the circular economy is really about very fundamentally rethinking the models on which our industrial economies are built. And to look at how can we decouple this idea of economic growth from the consumption of what are very finite resources, right? If you look at some statistics, I think historically every sort of 1% increase in GDP has had to have been supported by a 0.4% increase in resource use. And that sort of proportionality of GDP versus resource consumption is simply not sustainable. And that's for a few reasons, right? Sometimes these resources are simply not available. We're running out of them. So if you think of maybe sand for construction, you can't like sort of endlessly use that. There's a lot of price volatility. We're in the middle of a pandemic, and we saw the sort of very severe oil price shocks that happened as soon as the crisis hit. Sometimes it's also about there's material that's available, but it's just very expensive to mine, and sort of the ironically named rare earth metals, which are very key to a lot of the electronics that we use, our smartphones, and all of these things. They're available in plenty, but they're simply not easy to, very expensive to extract and mine, and also traditionally have been, concentrated in certain pockets of the world. So, there's also a possibility of a lot of supply chain disruption and shocks as well, right? So this is kind of how our linear model based on a lot of resource consumption is set up, and sort of some of the challenges that it faces. So the circular economy talks about, can you fundamentally and eventually decouple economic growth from resource use, right? And that I find is a very important framing, because that helps us to sort of distinguish whether something is circular or not. It's not an easy conversation to have in sort of the evolution of the circular economy and where we are in that transformation today. But I think it's a very important framing to have in mind. So if I was to go back to sort of, what the circular economy does, it's based on three very fundamental principles of designing out waste and pollution. And I would ask you to pay attention to the word design over there, because once you've designed something a particular way and put particular materials in it, there is very little that you can do to it at the end of its life cycle. So if you're not designing and putting in the right materials, then you've already sort of lost the plot in how do you bring that material back into the economy. The second principle is, keeping products and materials in use, and a big part of this is also extending product life. We today are seeing a lot of what is called planned obsolescence, which is, products are meant to sort of give up after, a certain period of time, simply so that companies can keep selling us more and more of the product, right? So you've got Gorilla Glass and whatnot, which is supposed to last forever in your iPhone, but then your iPhone itself only works for 2, 3, maybe 4 years, right? And even if the hardware works perfectly fine, you don't have software updates that can keep your phone sort of functional. So you're forced to kind of give it up. So that's, in many forms, the planned obsolescence prevents us from keeping those products in use for longer periods of time. And then sort of the third principle is on being able to regenerate natural systems. So with that sort of very basic framing of what the circular economy is, and that it is, in the early days, my job was to tell people the circular economy is not recycling. Today, I have to remind them a little further that, but closed loop recycling done the right way is actually the only real thing that puts all those materials back into a functioning economy at the end of a product's life. So while thinking circular economy, how do you not reduce it to recycling, but then how do you do closed loop recycling in sort of the proper manner? I think that sort of is a very basic definition of what the circular economy is. And these sort of three principles translate into various interventions across the life cycle of a product. If you were to look purely from product perspective. So that's, at the design and materials phase, how can you make, things, how can you make things more durable? How can you design for disassembly? How can you, that's sort of at the very beginning of the value chain. And then sort of my favorite part is, changing business models, right? So today, you and I are consumers in the linear economy, right? But how do we go from being a consumer to a user? And how do you change business models so that we are given access to a service rather than having to buy a product? And I think that sort of change in the business model, it's not talked about nearly enough. We are very focused on the beginning and the end of the product life cycle, but that center bit on how are we buying and using these products, that has to very fundamentally change for us to move into this, make progress with the circular transformation. And that's actually sort of the area that we at Infinitive are really fascinated by and trying to sort of figure out some solutions there. And then you've got, product level reuse, repair, refurbish, and remanufacturing models. And then of course, at the end of a product life, you have material recovery and recycling. So this is sort of all of circular economy. And, when I was, the question that always gets asked is, why is the private sector the one that has to lead the charge for the circular economy? And my answer is very simple. It's because the circular economy is about, to me, it's more about capturing lost economic value than just tackling the issue of waste, right? Waste is something you see. It's physical waste. You see, you react to it, but there's a lot of economic value that's wasted in the linear economy, and that's what we're trying to capture, right? And the private sector is supposed to be really good at doing that. So, so the private sector has to lead that charge. But, to very quickly sort of make a distinction, like the circular economy encompasses so many different things, right? And within those, some of those business models, it's very apparent to see where there is economic value that can be captured very easily. For example, in terms of increased asset utilization, right? And this is something where, we've seen the Ubers, we've seen the Zoom cars, we've seen them kind of come and say, none of them started because they wanted to be circular. They didn't start because they wanted to be sustainable, right? They simply said a privately owned vehicle, a car, is not used something like 80 to 90% of the day, right? If I were to own that car myself. So there's a lot of, there's sort of an unutilized asset there. And how do you increase the utilization of that asset? Like, how do you make that asset more productive? And how do you build a business model around that? And that's kind of what led to these rental and subscription models and so on, right? So it's a very basic business question, right? Rather than a circular economy question. But that kind of leads to what our circular business model. So some of these make inherent sense. And there are a lot of startups and innovators looking to capture that value. And it's been being done pretty well in the automotive space. And I think we're also now trying to see how that can be replicated for things like phones and TVs and I think even washing machines. So a thing to draw out here is that, we talk about these new business models. If you're part of the circular economy conversation, people hesitate to talk about the circular business models that we need to adopt because it's a very challenging thing to do. But if you think about it, it makes inherent sense. And these models have actually existed in other industries. Any heavy machinery, and if you look at it, these models have existed. People have made perfect business sense out of them. So it's simply a matter of us thinking a little out of the box and making sense of it for other products. And I say this because my actual introduction to the circular economy was sometime in 2014, 15. But and I said, oh wow, like product as a service model or a rental model is so a subscription model. It's so innovative. And my partner who worked in the oil and gas industry, yes, he's the villain. He worked in the oil and gas industry for a while. Said rental models for all of that heavy machinery is about as common as is possible, right? So he said there's nothing new about a rental model itself. So that's again sort of a framing that we need to keep in mind, because very often we go talk to businesses and they're like, that business model transformation is nearly impossible for us to do in the current circumstances. So, going back to this idea of capturing the private sector playing a role in capturing that value, these models where there is, where it's very apparent that there is value that's not being captured, and they work on putting a business model around that. But also to call attention to, say, other models. For instance, if you were to build something around recovery and recycling of plastic waste, that's a little bit more difficult to do because in our current systems, we simply don't price in, we don't put a price on externalities, and we don't have too many rules governing that. So for those models to become more robust and make economic sense, we would need the system to move in different ways. We either need collaborative models that industry establishes, or we need regulations coming in to sort of make those models more make more economic sense, really, and which is essentially what will help them scale. So this is sort of two sort of big ways of thinking of how you capture economic value and how the circular economy framework lets you do that. And I think, I'm not sure how much time I've got left, but I think the last sort of point that I want to make is around innovation, because that's an area that, again, we talk to a lot of people about, and we do some work around. So innovation for the circular economy, I think we've seen in the last, I think, maybe 4 to 5 years, a tremendous amount of innovation, whether it's in materials, whether it's in business models, whether it's in recovery, recycling technology. We've seen a lot of that. We've seen sort of, the innovation funnel, as people look, as the innovators look to prove their technology, establish a business case around them, and then to scale them up and sort of increase the acceptance of the innovation. That process is really, really slow. There are fantastic organizations like Fashion for Good, which are sort of bringing the ecosystem together to say, how do we increase the adoption and the speed of adoption of some of these innovations, and how do we work together as an industry to do that? So there's some organizations tackling that, but as a whole, we just need to be able to accelerate what this innovation journey looks like. And I say that because typically, if you look at how innovation has happened, not for circular economy, but us as as a civilization, we've just innovators are people who look around and say, hey, I can do this better, or I can do this differently. And someone's willing to pay a price for me to do that differently because they identify the value in it. And that's essentially all they had to sort of, very simplistic and reductionist way of looking at it, but that's sort of all they had to worry about, right? Whether they can do it differently, and whether someone was going to pay for it, and whether enough number of people were going to pay for it, right? But with innovating for a circular economy, which is again one of the levers to address climate change, we have a deadline, we have a target, right? Which we've never really had with a lot of the other innovation, right? If Facebook didn't have its social media platform, sure, its investors would be worried. If they didn't hit X number of users by 2020, their investors would be worried. But it was not something that led to a planetary scale crisis like climate change, right? So I feel like we need to rethink how we accelerate innovation, because innovation is very key to solving this whole, to accelerating the circular economy transition. And if we're going to do it the way we've been doing it all along, where there was no deadline and no target, it's going to be very, very challenging for us to get there. And sort of just adding on to that, and that's kind of my last point as well. And one way to sort of accelerate that innovation funnel and journey itself is, I think, collaboration. Because what I see today is, we're all saying something like plastic is a problem, right? And then we come up with different solutions around that, which is great, which is the fundamental point of innovation. But we also see a lot of, going down the wrong direction, right? And my sort of pet peeve is going back to paper. Is that really useful? There's a reason we switched from paper to plastic, right? And today, if we're going to sort of vilify plastic and say, let's just go back to doing paper packaging, that's not really useful at all. So there's some sort of, I think, consensus building and collaborative efforts that need to go into saying this is sort of the direction of innovation for us to make that innovation productive. Otherwise it just feels like we're all doing sort of very random things. And I think on that note, I will conclude. Actually, maybe I just had like one more point to make. And this is again a framing issue, right? I was a sustainability consultant before I became, whatever I am now. And we had these typical slides which said, do sustainability, save water, change your light bulbs. You have competitive advantage, right? We sold this idea of do sustainability and now circular economy for competitive advantage a lot. And I think that's sort of, doesn't help when you're going on the other side and saying, hey, we need to get industry together to collaborate. And I think we need to reframe this idea of competitive advantage. Who is it a competitive advantage against? Like, I think so far within industry, it was always about, am I doing better than my competitor? And that's enough for me to survive as a business. But I think today that isn't enough, right? It's not enough for you to just do better than your competitor because you're going to run out of water, period, right? It's not about your competitor at all in that space. So, your competitive advantage is in using a circular model or sort of in playing a part in this transformation is that you're gaining sort of the competitive advantage to work in what are very rapidly changing business conditions, which fundamentally threaten your business, right? It's no longer about your competitor, it's about the ecosystem and the business landscape as a whole. So I think I'm going to stop there. Those are sort of some very big picture ideas that have come through from a lot of our conversations, and I hope that helps to frame the rest of the conversation as Pranshu and Aditya get into the brass tacks of it. Thank you.
Thank you, Pavithra. Indeed, that sort of set the framework that's gonna overarch the rest of our discussion today. Once again, a reminder to all of you joining us from home that you can leave your questions in the Q&A tab and we will pick up on them later after everyone's made their opening statements. Now over to Aditya.
Yeah, thank you so much, Pavithra, for that high-level overview. I think I had expertise to sort of give that impromptu high-level overview, but what I can share is sort of how we got started in the circular economy sector, our observations in the sector, and some of the problems that we saw, and how rePurpose is working to address some of those problems. Let me just quickly share my screen. Can you see my screen okay? Great, thank you. So yeah, maybe I'll just, so the topic of sort of what I am talking about is plastic credits as a financial instrument to mobilize financing necessary for the circular economy. And like I said, I'd like to frame this through our journey in the circular economy sector itself. And so we actually got started, my teammates and I actually got started in the circular economy space, doing our thesis right out of college or in our final year at college, doing our thesis on informal waste recycling. And our research took us from landfill to landfill, understanding the dynamics of the informal recycling economy. And we saw, of course, the plastic problem firsthand. I mean, we're all, I think, aware of the environmental damages of plastic pollution. Much like the man in this photo, we are a society that is quite literally drowning in our own consumption. But while the environmental damages caused by plastic are well known, through our research, our eyes were opened to the often overlooked humanitarian crisis that has resulted from how we as a society offload the burdens of our consumption onto some of society's most historically marginalized sections, millions of informal waste pickers across the world who serve a crucial environmental role in the sense that they serve as the entry point for the recycling economy across different parts of the world. But despite this, remain trapped in an occupation that is fundamentally exploitative and something that we think should not exist. And so through our research, our high-level conclusion was that simply that nature lacks capital, right? We need to allocate better capital or more capital and urgently do so if we want to have a hope of solving some of the monumental problems of waste, as well as across every sustainability challenge that we see today. Specifically coming to the waste management space and the circular economy space, through our research, we realized that there are actually hundreds, if not thousands of social entrepreneurs, nonprofits, and sometimes even cooperatives of waste pickers themselves who have come about to create efficient and ethical systems of plastic waste or waste management in general that intercept plastic and other material streams before they become pollutants, while at the same time being inclusive in that they transition existing informal workers into more formalized and dignified livelihoods. And now we saw that these social enterprises had propped up across the world, but fundamentally we also found that not a lot of them were able to scale their model, their proven track record of impact, creating a context-appropriate impact. It was difficult for them to scale this to the national level that we need them to operate at, and honestly, the global level that we need them to operate at, right? And we realized serving hundreds of these innovators that the biggest problem driving this lack of scale was the lack of access to capital. Historically, waste management has been notoriously underfunded. We see that and a depressing statistic here is that more money has gone into WeWork than almost every recycling social enterprise over the last 25 years. And we think that's a big sign of why we have this plastic waste problem, right? Which is that we're simply not allocating enough capital to the solutions that do exist, that have a proven track record of impact. Now, some more, I guess, reports to share with you. This is an excerpt from the Breaking the Plastic Wave report, which essentially showcases that if we continue consuming as we are today, that we are on track as a global society to triple the amount of plastic leaking into the environment. Now, fortunately, though, there is a silver lining in this report, which is that up to 80% of that leakage can actually be handled by investing in existing solutions alone, not even sort of breaking a new wheel. But as Pavithra said, a lot of the solutions exist. We just have to find the right ways to bring them to scale. And so while all of this is happening on the waste management side of things, maybe fast forwarding to how we sort of saw an opportunity here to try and change things, we saw that consumers across the world have woken up to this issue of plastic pollution, unlike anything really before it, right? Plastic has become the number one environmental issue in the minds of US consumers today and consumers across the world, even above climate change. And that's because plastic is such a tangible and pervasive issue that it can really serve as what I like to call gateway drug to environmental activism for a lot of people. And so consumers are fed up of all this plastic waste that they're seeing because it's so obvious when, even to my grandmother, who does not know a lot about the intricacies of sustainability, it's obvious to her when she sees plastic waste choking an animal somewhere on a beach in Mumbai, that it's simply not sustainable, and therefore they are fed up and demanding action from brands. In fact, this demand is translating into buying decisions, right? CPG products have grown 560% faster than conventional ones since 2013 alone. And 80% of Americans, and I'm sure this stat is global as well, are looking to switch to brands that are taking action on plastic waste. So I do think that we've reached a point which is fortuitous, right? That we have, of course, a huge issue, but we also have a huge wave of consumer momentum that is compelling action from the key decision makers, the brands themselves. But what we see is that there are a couple of observations that make it impossible to sort of solve this problem overnight, and what make it such a complex problem. So let me just unpack these a little bit. On the first side, I think that plastic waste, while there is existing recycling ecosystems and existing solutions, what we often see is that the material streams put out into the environment today, over 50% of them are simply too low value to be economically incentivizing anyone to go out and collect them and recycle them. And so therefore, what we see is that a lot of the material that we're generating today as waste is simply not feasible for anyone to collect from an economic standpoint. This compounds the problem of sort of historical lack of financing in the waste management space, which I touched on earlier. And of course, what we also see is that it's impossible for brands to flip a switch overnight and get rid of all of the plastic in their supply chains, right? Because what we see is that the alternatives are either too expensive, lack the quality that plastic offers that a brand requires, or sometimes might even be counterproductive when it comes to sustainability goals. And so, or it might just be that the alternatives are simply not there yet when it comes to scalability. And so, despite the consumer demand being there, clearly for brands to do something about plastic, it becomes quite difficult for them to flip a switch overnight and rid all of their supply chains of plastic waste. And so that's how we came up with this concept at rePurpose Global of helping brands go plastic neutral, of taking responsibility for their own consumption of plastic waste by and doing so overnight while setting a longer-term roadmap towards reducing tangibly the amount of plastic that they generate. And I'll quickly give you an overview of how we operate and then give some examples of projects that we fund through this concept of plastic credits. On a high level, we are at rePurpose are trying to create a two-sided ecosystem that connects two very disparate groups, right? On the one hand, we have consumer-facing brands who use plastic in their own packaging and are putting waste out into the environment. And on the other, we have these amazing waste management solutions, as well as innovators in the circular economy that need more financing. And so our goal is to mobilize financing from brands in favor of these existing innovators and solutions on the ground to help them scale up the impact. And the way we do this is through this fundamental building block of the plastic credit. And just to define what I mean by a plastic credit, it's essentially a representation of environmental impact, right? So whoever holds the credit is responsible for creating the impact that it represents. And so we're very much trying to mirror and parallel and learn from the carbon credit space to apply those same frameworks to the world of plastic in a hope of mobilizing a little bit more financing for these waste management solutions. So we define a plastic credit as 1 kilogram of additional plastic waste avoided or removed from the environment. And so the key word there is additional, and I'll touch on that in more detail in a second, but essentially it means that the plastic credit needs to be used to finance action that would not have otherwise happened and is happening as a result of the plastic credit itself. So with that sort of concept of plastic credits, we unite the plastic waste producers, the brands on the left, as well as these plastic waste removers, the innovators on the right, allowing these two parties to transact on this instrument of plastic credits. So the way it works is quite simple. I'll illustrate this with an example itself of one of our sort of early champions. It's a brand called MyProtein. It's one of Europe's sort of larger sports nutrition brands. And they had a line called My Vegan that they wanted to do something about for their plastic usage because they, due to food regulation, were not able to replace the plastic packaging that they were using overnight. And so we calculated My Vegan's plastic usage. Let's say it was about 400,000 kilograms for the sake of example. At next, My Vegan can purchase 400,000 plastic credits and in the process fund 400,000 kilograms of plastic removal from a waste management partner, say in Goa, India. And in the process, rePurpose certifies My Vegan as now being plastic neutral because they've started to take action on their, take responsibility for their plastic usage by pulling out as much plastic from the environment and as they generate. And so that's sort of a high level overview of our solution. Now I'd like to talk more about our impact partners. I mean, these are the sort of innovators that inspire us every day. Our goal is to sort of be this platform, and our theory of change is very much inspired by empowering these existing innovators that already have the proven track record of impact in their local context and mobilizing the financing that they need to help them scale up the impact. And so we're really proud to be working with some really innovative and inclusive waste management social enterprises, nonprofits, as well as cooperatives from across India to Indonesia to Colombia. And each of these organizations we work with to create an intervention that can be financed by plastic credits that is appropriate to sort of their core competencies and builds on their core competencies. So the goal with each of these partners is to fund these interventions that are additional. As I said, we define or we bake into the definition of plastic credit this concept of additionality. And very simply, it just means that, like I said, we need to fund impact that would not have otherwise happened anyway. And so we look at the existing baseline levels of collection that are happening working with our waste management partners to set a baseline in that local region and design an intervention that generates a delta over the baseline such that we are creating additional impact using plastic credit financing. Maybe now I'll just give a couple of examples and I'll wrap up of projects that sort of plastic credits can finance. On a high level, we sort of bucket these interventions that we conceptualize with our impact partners on the ground into three broad categories. And I'll just quickly go over each of them. So first, we have this intervention type of recovering low value plastic waste that is simply economically unviable to collect today. As I said earlier, nearly 50% of city waste streams is often low value plastic that is no one in the existing economy, neither the informal waste picker, nor a professional waste collection organization, nor recyclers in the region are incentivized to collect and process. And therefore, these materials end up dumped into the environment or openly burnt. Now, using plastic credit financing, what we can provide is a sort of unit economic stabilization subsidy, right? To make it economically viable on a per kilogram basis, to allow for the ethical collection and proper disposal of low-value plastic waste that otherwise would be dumped in the environment. Our second intervention type is much more towards our longer-term vision as well, is to fund infrastructure for waste management, particularly in places where it's principally lacking, right? Particularly in rural areas. And I'll go into some examples in just a second, but essentially taking supply chains or setting up supply chains, basic infrastructure, collection facilities, a small baling machine even, and training local residents to be employed as professional waste collectors who can bring material back to that collection facility and segregate it and sort and deal with each material stream appropriately. And finally, our third intervention type is to use plastic credits to scale up innovations that are sort of pushing us beyond the paradigm of plastic waste altogether, that either through innovative materials, alternative materials, innovative technologies, or circular business models are replacing the need for plastic altogether. And in the process, the goal here is to use plastic credits to creditize the avoidance of plastic that these projects are undertaking and help them scale up using this financing. So that's on a high level the kinds of interventions that we fund. And maybe just to give you a couple of examples, a quick shout out to some of our amazing impact partners. One is in Goa, We Recycle, and they essentially, as an example of the first intervention type, incentivize the low value plastic recovery using plastic credits, where in Goa, of course, we see a huge waste management problem because of the lack of infrastructure, basically, as well as the high quantity of multi-laminate plastic, which of course is across the board, across India. And the goal here is very much to leverage the existing capabilities of this waste management organization, in that We Recycle already has a material recovery facility and relationships with existing informal collectors and recyclers, and leverage those strengths to fund an intervention that allows for additional plastic recovery, where specifically We Recycle conducts training programs to educate local recyclers conclave on how to process and deal with low value plastics like MLP, and in the process collect this material through a subsidy and incentivizing them with the subsidy financed by plastic credits, and then collecting and aggregating that material in their own recovery facility where it's sent to an appropriate end destination. Now, of course, that end destination locally might not be the best case scenario or not the most circular in the immediate short run, but the goal here is to sort of move up the waste management hierarchy where possible. In this instance, it's at co-process and cement kilns to sort of deal with this material in a no residue manner. That's one example of a project that we work with. And second, I'd love to give you an example of our partner Greenworms in Kerala, much more around the setting up infrastructure itself for particularly rural regions where there's a lack of waste management infrastructure. So Greenworms operates in Kerala, operating on a unique PPP model, working with local gram panchayats or village councils to set up these end-to-end waste management systems where they have a pretty holistic model that they fund the facility itself by the PPP model with the Gram Panchayat, and then they employ local women from self-help groups who are trained as professional sort of waste collectors and paid a professional salary as well, and who then, these women go door to door, raise awareness on how to segregate waste between dry and wet. Residents who now start segregating their waste have their waste collected. That dry waste is brought to that collection facility set up through the Gram Panchayat, and we then are able to sort and segregate each material stream further so that we can appropriately reroute it to its appropriate end destination, be it recycling or co-processing as appropriate. So those are a couple of examples of projects that we think sort of have the potential to be financed by plastic credits. I'll wrap up quickly just talking a little bit about the sort of, I think, the circular economy's potential in generating really, I think, impactful, killing two birds with one stone on some level, right? Because if we push and aim for an ethical and efficient circular economy, we can not only create a lot of environmental impact and address some of these global level problems that we are having on the environment, but we can also create a lot of local socio-economic impact by better transitioning workers from an occupation that we fundamentally think should not exist, which is informal and exploitative waste picking, into more formalized and dignified jobs in waste management, or even giving a pathway to transition out of it through sort of the livelihoods that can be generated. So I'll wrap up here. Thank you again so much for listening, and really excited for the panel discussion as well. I'll turn it over to back to you, Tanya.
Thank you so much, Aditya, for that very interesting intervention. Once again, a reminder to all of you to leave your questions in the Q&R tab, and we will pick them up later. Now, over to Pranshu. Um, Pranshu, are you with us?
Yeah, hi everyone, and nice to be a part of this panel, and thank you for inviting me. So, I think let's just first start, and I've been looking at the various questions which are coming, and very interesting questions have been posted. So I think the debate really starts from that: are we on the right path? Something that I was asking the team at Rethinking Economics yesterday, like, why are you even organizing this? And the question which was brought up was, we want to really question that: is the present way of in which economy is working, is that okay? And are there fundamental challenges in how we are functioning as a and to me, the thing that comes to mind is the way we have created our economy is like, I'll contextualize it with, it's like really, we have designed a ship which goes to the moon. We have designed a vehicle by which we are putting a man on the moon, but we have not thought, how do we bring him back? So we are creating all these elements, converting them to compounds and then to products, but there is no way that these products can come back to their elemental form. And one thing which we should always remember is that we are the only species on this planet who produces waste. We are the only ones. We are the only ones who are creating linear things, but and after that, no one knows what happens to it. So there are some fundamental challenges. There are certain tools which have come up, and tools have changed names. So for me, I find cradle to grave, extended producer responsibility, circular economy, all more or less, pointing to the same thing, that how do we move from creating waste, or creating an economy where we have things all around us. And please take a pause and just look at everything around you for a second. The chair on which you are sitting, the furniture around you, your books, the clothes, glasses if you are wearing them, your phones, laptops, what happens to them at the end of their life? And this thought doesn't occur, and that's the problem. This thought doesn't occur. That's where the fundamental challenge is, that what happens to all of this. And just pick up some statistics. I'll give you some numbers which so we have recently started also figuring out mattresses recycling in India. 2 crore mattresses go to landfills every year, for example. I mean, a number that I had never even imagined. It never even occurred what happens to mattresses. And this is the state for pick up any product category, that's the state. And the primary reason why Karosambhav came up as an organization, because we felt in 2017, when government was revising the first regulation, which was based on extended producer responsibility principle, which was electronic waste, we felt it is time to show success to government on this very principle. Because if government finds success on implementing EPR, if EPR is well understood, and it is not an easy journey. In every country, it has taken 10 to 15 years. But if there is success in implementation of EPR for one product category, then it is replicable. And it is replicable from one product to 35, 40, 50 products, depending on the nature of the products, depending on the toxicity of the products themselves. So one can pick up a category and then apply. And the good news is it has, we were able to give some success in early stages of e-waste. And I'll share some slides to share the journey of Karosambhav. And then it is now being applied to plastics. It has very recently been applied to batteries. It is coming for end-of-life vehicles. It is being discussed for mattresses. So, the journey has started, and that is the key. So, and another point is, at times we always assume when we talk of circular economy that the liability is of brands, it is of producers. They should fundamentally pay for it. Yes, one can always say that they have an instrument to load the costs because they are creating a product, so they can, but at the end of the day, it is responsibility of all of us. If we look at why e-waste has become a challenge globally, for example, think of mobile phones as a category or laptops as a category, very difficult to collect products. It is not because brands don't want to do the right thing. It is also because we don't want to recycle as individuals. We would like to rather hoard them, hide them, sit on them, because someday we bought them. Someday our friend gave it to us, someone's mom gave it to us. We have a love affair for devices. Yes, plastics we don't hoard, and that's why it goes all the way to oceans and everything. And we don't find value in plastic or packaging for that matter. But think of furniture. I mean, how much old furniture would be lying in your home? There would be still, good amount of it. Think of mattresses. So the point is, if we start opening this pack, and this pack is big. This pack is not small. This pack is big. It is hundreds and thousands of products. Some products are low in our own perception. They are of low value. Plastics lies in that category. Or let's say packaging, not plastics. Toys people wouldn't throw easily. That's also plastics. Sometimes poor quality plastics. But you would throw your packaging because it is soiled, it is dirty, you don't want it to stink in your home. So the fundamental point I think that we all need to drive is figuring out, in whichever field we are. We may be in product design, we may be in brand management, we may be in marketing, we may be in supply chain management. There are hundreds of things that we all are doing. How do we integrate this very basic thought of what happens to a product or whatever I do at the end of its life? And can it be made circular? And that is the core journey which Karosambhav is trying to drive. Actually, our name, I see there are many international people. Karosambhav literally translates to make it possible. Because when we started the journey, and I'll share a few slides. I hope my screen is visible. Yeah, okay. So when we started the journey, the first challenge that we faced was in terms of, well, this is undoable. What are you talking? I mean, who's going to manage all this product? There is too much of mafia, all across the world. And I had also, primarily experienced it. I've worked in EPR, extended producer responsibility, for almost 20 years now. And yes, it has been an extremely poorly governed sector globally. And waste has never invited talent. I mean, let's put it that way. It's only in the last few years that, people are like Aditya are really starting to come up and, from great colleges and starting to put up their thoughts and systems and processes to solve the problem at scale. But largely it has been a very, very misgoverned stage. So the whole idea of even calling the organization Karosambhav was, if it is so damn difficult, let us make it possible. And so that it becomes a movement in itself. So what Karosambhav does is, essentially we collaborate with disintegrated players across the value chain. These include brands, these include consumers, recyclers, all sorts of value chain players to create solutions. While considering sustainable finance, and sustainable finance is the key. One can do a lot of things with voluntary money, or voluntary efforts, or grant money, but the kind of money, like Aditya also shared, that comes into this sector is extremely low, pitiful. And to really think about it, when you create a product, think of how much manpower, resources are put in creating a laptop versus how much manpower is put to deconstruct a laptop, or for that matter, plastics, or a plastic bottle, or a furniture. We are essentially talking, you have, in an organization of size 100, you have 99.9 people for manufacturing and only 0.1. Even that ratio is actually very, very high. It would be 0.00000001 probably of people and resources being put into deconstruct the product. And that is where the fundamental problem occurs. So how does one start moving around it? How does one create and pave a way to bring sustainable finance? And then most importantly, how does one bring good governance to this space. This, something which is ethical, something where good organizations come, where, people look at building their careers, which is driven by technology, where traceability and transparency are very core things. Today, these are like, gemstones when you talk of waste management and you come across organization which seems ethical and you're like, wow. It is not like, this is, ideally this should be the way of life. But just because the way the sector has been, and the kind of importance it has got, it is today a wow when you see just a simple clean organization applying simple basic things, which in regular industries is a regular way of life. So I mean, the sector has multitude of challenges, and what is very important is how do we focus on those challenges, how do we solve that scale, how do we solve that problem. If we go to understanding extended producer responsibility, which for me is no different from the basic concepts of circular economy, I find a lot of these terms really overlapping with each other, probably in spirit trying to do the same things, but literally may have a little bit of change in the way they are coined. Essentially EPR has always meant doing more than before, moving co-responsibility from municipality, because the waste streams are becoming more and more complex and municipality does not really understand sorting, for example, of electronic waste, batteries, cars. How do you sort out so many components? So businesses have to be bought in. And then who pays for these mechanisms? How do you physically organize systems to solve these problems at scale? And those are the broad systems that have to be developed. If we take a case of electronic waste, we talk of the chain before producers, so how a product gets created. But if we start looking at chain post consumers, we have people who are generating waste. So people like me and you who buy a product, and then once it is dead, we don't know what to do it. Either we give it or we throw it or we sell it somewhere, and then it goes somewhere, and that somewhere is never known. There are bulk consumers or large organizations who would auction because that gives the highest level of money. But again, they don't know where it goes. There are auctioning platforms, waste collectors across, and most of the market today is informal sector in most emerging markets. So people have made livelihood out of it, and not from now, for decades. And then, most of the waste would go to informal aggregators, to informal dismantlers, recyclers. So, the value chain is large. And how does one piece in all these value chain to create a large term impact? And what kind of a policy driver is required, framework is required to make it happen? And not just a policy driver, but also the real action which is required. So how do we land any policy at a grassroots level to make the clock tick is critical. And that is what Karosambhav is trying to do. The first is, and I'm taking example from a e-waste. Karosambhav works in electronic waste, plastics, and batteries all as of now. And so, the way we started our journey was to focus on, can we convert things from being a black box to a glass house, from a space where nothing is known to a space where every single thing is known, because until unless you know everything, how do you innovate and clean up? And that's a very, very fundamental problem of this sector. When I say in the sector, I'm talking of waste in general across emerging markets. This is not unique to India. And I can even say it is not unique to even emerging markets in countries, even in Nordic countries, and I have experience working in some of those spaces. These challenges were always there. And then in a country like India, how does one integrate informal sector? Because the problem is not just suddenly environmental. I mean, one can start thinking environment, but it suddenly takes a social dimension. Because now when we talk of waste, there are over 3 to 4 million people who are involved in picking it up, cleaning it up, managing it, and their whole livelihood is waste. And if a regulation in a country does not bring them in or does not consider them to be a part of the work itself, how do these people integrate what happens to their livelihood? So there are large spaces which need to be sorted out if we have to solve the problem at scale. So our focus has been on building enabling platforms which allow cleaning up, first of all, and I'm using the word very consciously, cleaning up the whole industry, making it transparent, bringing standards, standards which can be audited, which can be checked. In electronics, for example, no standards are there in India today at this point in time. And Kurosambhav is working with a group of organizations, including GIZ, under a EU REI project, which is focusing on creating standards for the whole waste value chain of electronics. Similar standards are required for plastics, batteries, you may name it, and that category requires this level of work. Driving ethics. Now, what is ethics in this sector? And ethics has so many dimensions. So defining those core things, because what is ethics to me may not be ethics to you. What is that? So, what is it? How do we give a language to ethics in the sector? And how do we ensure that there is funding then available to drive those ethical practices? How does one create ecosystems which support, which do not compete, which support? Today, the way Indian regulation has come up and the way it has been enforced, we have ended up creating a lot of competition in the market where multiple entities are coming up and are competing instead of finding ways in which they can collaborate. So how does one rethink some of those fundamentals? So that is the broader space in which Kurosambhav works. We have presence in all states, in over 120 cities in India on electronic waste side. We today work with over 5,000 odd waste pickers and aggregators, several hundred repair shops. And the way we have modeled our work is how do we enable informal sector to become formal by opening a business. So out of these 5,000 waste pickers and aggregators, there are over 800 companies which have been created today jointly by these pickers and aggregators. But then another part which is missing is how does one drive behavioral change? So even if you end up creating a collection system, how do you collect the waste from individuals? So how do you ensure that people participate in programs, people understand? And today that understanding is at an extremely low level. So these are the kind of things that Kurosambhav is trying to drive. Creation of an industry platform which allows people to collaborate, which allows harmonizing things, which brings in sustainable finance, which allows consumers to come on board. And that is the spirit. And then how does one bring a whole enabling framework to all of this via working with development partners across the board? So Kurosambhav has partnered, for example, with multiple types of organizations to enable these things, from a policy formation to a standard creation to a grassroots implementation perspective. I'll take a pause here. I think I'm going on and on for too long, but this is what I wanted to share, and I'm happy to take more questions during the debate.
Thank you so much, Pranshu. So we've had a very insightful discussion so far from all three of our panelists. At this point, before we move on to a question answer session from the audience, I'd like to ask all of you if there's anything that you'd like to follow up on or react to something that the other panelists have said. At this point, the floor is open. Pavithra, I think you're muted.
Okay, I knew I was going to do this sometime during the panel. But maybe just one thing to add on to what Pranshu was saying. How do you bring all of that product or material back once it's in the hands of the consumer? When you talk about it in terms of recycling e-waste at the end of life, it is challenging, but I think that's where maybe looking at newer business models helps, right? Like if you look at what happens with tires, nobody's interested in the tires and it's, lying by the roadside, and nobody wants to give it back. But if your fundamental model was around, you don't own the tire, you only get the service of using a tire, which is what companies like Michelin did with their fleet services. I think that sort of helps in solving sort of the economics and the logistics of bringing a product back from the consumer, because these models work in the B2B side, they don't work really well on the B2C side, right? So, but I think there are sort of models that we can derive that inspiration from, because, like you said, just collecting things back from an individual consumer is like nearly impossible, particularly for waste, right? But if you solve that through a different business model at the very central part of the product life cycle, maybe we don't have the challenge at the very end. I mean, that's just, would love to hear your thoughts on that.
Pavithra, was it to me?
Yeah, I mean, I was just commenting on what you were saying, but
Sure.
it felt like you were going to respond. So
yeah.
but
So
it was just a comment. If you want to respond, you could.
No, I'll just add, because almost 20 years back, when I was studying, I did my thesis on product service systems in the chemical industry. And they have worked extremely well in the B2B space. But in B2C, they are very, very difficult to land, just because the cost of managing the whole thing is very high. And one can ride on external funding to start such models. Fundamentally, all the sharing economy models are product service systems in action, in a different format, but they are essentially all product service systems in action. But apart from external funding, the challenge is, without external funding, it has been very, very difficult to create those systems and land them at a grassroots level. So yeah, again, no answers. These are all open questions, and I think it is important that all of the people that are here, we all start debating and find answers to these very difficult questions. And I think the answer lies in we are trying to, without disrupting the existing way of life, we are trying to find answers, and the problem is right there.
Right.
Right. Thank you for that exchange. So now moving on to questions that have come in from our audience. In fact, this is something that, Pranshu, you've already replied to, but I would like to bring it up so everyone can once again debate on this. So this is an anonymous question that goes, is the idea that there has to be a business case for the circular economy fundamentally misguided?
From my point of view, 100% it is misguided. I mean, do you need a business case for life to survive? I mean, this is as simple as that. I mean, we are talking because, and I think it is important sometimes to start looking at, and there are some today very, very good work, and one can look at, for example, Living Planet Index reports of WWF, which come out every second year or every year, which essentially are trying to put value on species, on nature. And no one, because we have all externalized it, it is, we say, okay, there is no value and there is no business case. But, well, sorry, your business case is completely wrong, because you're not even considering what needs to be considered. So goes to the very fundamental point, the way we have frameworked the question, the scoping is wrong in itself. How do we change that scoping and it's a boundary issue for me. So happy to hear others.
Yeah, actually, absolutely echoing what Pranshu said. If business case it's about what context that business case is being built in, right? Because if you price in all the externalities, then yes, there is definitely a business case. And I think the reason we keep saying business case is because that's language that industry understands, right? Because the first question the minute I'm in anyone's office is, what's the business case for this, right? And this is exactly what I tell them, Pranshu, and sort of echoing a lot of what you said. It's about what your boundary is when you're defining that business case, right? And is it about the business case today, or is it about what is sort of your long-term vision as a company? So I think, so we speak the language of business case, I think because we're used to, and sometimes because we have to, because that's what's expected of us. But if for a lot of things, if it has to make a business case, then we really need to question, are we taking in, are we pricing those externalities, right? So those sort of two I think that's my response to that question.
Thank you. Aditya, would you like to add something? Or
yeah, I mean, I think just to echo Pranshu and Pavithra, I think what you said, Pranshu, is very true, right? Like, we are trying to bring about this radical change when people are not willing to make radical change themselves, right, in their own business model or in even their our personal consumption styles. And I think that's where regulation just needs to play a part, right? And it's heartening to see that regulation is slowly shifting to sort of force the boundary to be expanded such that it's hopefully starting to take shape. But yeah, I think it's just a call for more regulation in the space itself.
All right. Thank you. So now, if I could pick up on another question that we have, again, anonymous, do you think that by offsetting carbon emissions, we are supporting the status quo of environmental degradation instead of structurally changing the way businesses or our society operates?
Yeah, maybe I can start off, and I'd love to hear Pavithra and Pranshu's thoughts as well. In my opinion, I think it depends on how you use an offset, right? I think one thing in the plastic credit space, it's quite a nascent space, right? And so one thing we have the benefit of is learning from the mistakes of the carbon offset space. And there were lots of mistakes, right? And just day before yesterday, there was an article in Bloomberg that showed how this wide swathe of land that was funded by carbon offsets would actually not been at risk anyway. It was just it was going to be perfectly fine completely. And so I think it's important to learn from where the carbon offset space went wrong. But I do think that offsets can play a valuable role in taking action today on solving a really crucial financing gap, right? Particularly in mobilizing financing in favor of the right intervention types. And particularly when you combine offsets, at the end of the day, I don't think there is one silver bullet to some of these monumental problems that we have today, right? I think we need a arsenal of solutions. And so offsets can be a useful, I think, tool in the toolbox for sustainability to supplement sort of, and have to be accompanied by longer term reduction goals and concrete roadmaps to get to those goals, right? Because too often times we see these big commitments that are not met by brands. Yeah, that's sort of my high level thoughts that I see the practicality of offsets, but I do think that they need to be done right. So a concrete example that we can learn from the carbon offset space is focus more directly on additionality, right? I think the example that I gave of this forest land that was funded by carbon offsets, but was actually not, that financing was not changing anything. That is the lack of additionality in that offset, which I think is contrasted with a direct air capture technology, for example, in the carbon offset space, that is directly funding the adoption of a technology that is pulling out carbon from the atmosphere and therefore is directly creating an impact. So I think it's really important to tie a direct line between the offset financing to the impact that is generated. And my second point is that I think offsets need to not be used in isolation, but rather need to be accompanied by, and this is something we at rePurpose mandate with each of the brands that we work with, that you have to have a longer term roadmap towards reduction and a pathway towards getting there. And so, yeah, those are two of my thoughts. I'd love to hear your thoughts, Pranshu.
I think, I mean, I'm not quite sure I'm qualified to talk about this, but very sort of high level, I mean, carbon offsets were created as a sort of market mechanism. And I think a decade plus ago, it was like, we've hit upon this amazing market-based solution, right? And I think, I mean, in the middle of COVID, in the sort of conversation about rethinking our current models of capitalism itself, and do we need a new kind of capitalism? I think what we're all sort of realizing is markets are efficient, but I think particularly with certain areas, you need to have a lot of oversight and sort of draw boundaries on some of these market mechanisms, right? Like, I think that's sort of the very high level conversation that's happening. So, and I think the same applies to carbon emissions as that, carbon offsets as that sort of market mechanism. So I mean, so yeah, so I think that's just adding on to what Aditya said about, but I don't know. I don't know the answers to, who is going to do this oversight and, who's going to create this mechanism and, track what's happening, and can we do it well, and can we do it quickly enough? So I think that sort of is very fundamental to answering, are carbon offsets useful? As a way of mobilizing finance, sure. But again, I think that comes with its own limitations on the additionality factor that Aditya mentioned as well. So I think like like if you asked me this a decade ago, I would have been dead against the idea of carbon offsets. It's not a badge I still wear. But yeah, I think they could work, but in very restricted scenarios. But even as we try to sort of do the core work of structurally changing the economy, and this as maybe as a temporary mechanism, I don't know. It can't sort of be a permanent solution to a lot of things that we're doing.
I like to add certain things here. So I'll not talk about carbon credits. I'll talk about, waste credits, and I find myself actually fundamentally against them, primarily because they distort the market from a design perspective. So what happens is the whole idea of, making producers responsible is to drive change in design. The core idea of circular economy is not waste treatment. It is waste prevention. Or if we talk of extended producer responsibility, it is fundamentally focused on waste prevention, which essentially means that, first of all, do we even need plastics in the first place? Do we really need packaging, and a packaging of a certain type? I've been a student of Thomas Linkoist. We have done so much work over the last several years. And EPR has failed whenever we have distanced EPR from producers. So what happens when you have a credit-based system is someone pays, or a brand pays, and it's like, I have washed my hand and I'm done with it. Here is the money. I made my margins. On that margin, I've kept a tiny bit of an extra something which I am paying as a cess to whosoever, and they can take care. Which essentially means now the focus of waste prevention is gone. The only thing that we are left with is now cleanup and nothing else, because now I am so accustomed to the idea of just paying a cess and getting rid of my core challenge. And if you come and start looking at, for example, if we talk of plastics, let's think of multi-layered, or these composite materials which have multiple polymers combined into one fraction. Or if we talk of electronics, gluing of several types of plastics, or aluminum coupled with steel, coupled with copper, and then molded in plastic. How do you segregate them? Because design suddenly, and this is the place where design has a role. That, and if it remains my core responsibility, that not only I'm responsible to play a role financially, but also design from a design perspective, which means the problem is near me. What happens the moment we talk of a credit-based system is I have put the problem very far from me. So I've given, it's like washing my sins. Okay, I'll commit a lot of sins, and then I'll go and take a, do some puja and get rid of that. So that is what I feel. It's a guilt. Getting rid of your guilt based mechanism. When we talk of it works for carbon credits because the market works very differently, but when we talk of waste credits, and these will differ from category to category, there will be certain categories where it will make sense, but the whole idea of prevention has to be thought that is it allowing that prevention, or is it just becoming a control? Because the moment you have made it a control, it's an endless catch up, and it is guaranteed that we will never be able to catch up if we are in a control mode.
Okay, so some differing viewpoints.
But I think just sort of tying all of that together, this is very difficult to do, so we don't talk about it, right? But we need temporary mechanisms in place, right? So today we have all this waste, and if waste credits are a way of mobilizing finance towards solving the issue that already is, right? This is plastic that companies or us or who are put out in the market and out in the oceans and the landfills, and somebody still has to do the job of cleaning that up, and that requires capital, infrastructure, all of this stuff, right? So, can you have sort of temporary mechanisms to finance this, and can waste credits be part of that? But then also say that the target is to fundamentally move from multi-layer to packaging that's more easy to handle, and that retains a lot of its value and can be put back into the system more easily, right? So I think we're always sort of looking at the extremes.
Yes, and thank you, Pavithra, for saying that.
Transitional pathway is something we don't really want to put a lot of energy into, maybe because it is transitional. But if you're talking about a massive transformation, you need a transitional pathway. Neither this nor that is going to work.
Yeah, I think, sometimes we become idealists. So, and a lot of these debates are theoretical. And some of these models can essentially help solve, if the large change is not happening, why should I not look at a +1 scenario, which means, I am at least doing something better than before. So if a credit model enables a positive change, then why not? I mean, why should I look at only the best case scenario? And especially when I know that it's not coming in the next 10 years, 15 years. So completely agree with you.
And I think, sorry, Aditya, go ahead.
No, go on, Pavithra.
I think this is one thing. I mean, again, I don't feel quite qualified to comment on the regulatory side of things, but this is one thing I've heard over and over again in terms of having sort of a long-term vision on the regulatory side of it as well. Because, if you're talking about having a regulation around end-of-life vehicles today, or having a regulation around anything today, right? You sort of need to put that thought out for the market to kind of do its magic 10 or 15 years before you bring that regulation in place. But the way we kind of seem to be working is no one, we're very hesitant to make a move on something. And then, you wait for the regulation to come in. Once it comes in, you're talking about all these challenges of why you can't meet it, right? So, which is why maybe a longer term vision of, okay, here's something that's going to come with some regulatory oversight in a 10-year period. Here's a transitional pathway to get to that so that we solve the problem that we do have while also not creating more of an issue and putting more of that problem out there, right? So yeah, I think this is just something I pontificate on. And again, yeah, it's just theoretical, but I think this is sort of what we need to start working on.
Yeah, I mean, I think just to echo both Pranshu and Pavitra's points, I mean, we sell waste credits, but I think I would agree completely with what Pranshu said, right? In the sense that our entire thesis is that these, at the end of the day, we are a small sustainability social enterprise, early stage sustainability social enterprise. And so we are not claiming to sort of provide the silver bullet. We're saying that this is one tool that can fit into the toolbox of the corporate plastic policy playbook, right? And it needs to be accompanied by redesign. The one question or maybe sort of thought that I have to what you said, Pranshu, around this disincentivizing sort of redesign, there is some data, I think, around that, where companies that have invested, just from the carbon markets, companies that have invested in carbon offsets have actually been the ones that have shown more reduction over time, because the sort of conditional probability that if you are a company that is purchasing offsets, then you're probably a little bit more likely to care about changing behaviors over a long run as well. So there is some positive data emerging from that, but I do think that that needs to be mandated, right? So these credit systems cannot be used in isolation. It needs to be accompanied by fundamental redesign and thinking at the top of the value chain. But yeah, I completely agree with what both of you said. And we see it as very much a transitional solution, right? And that's what we tout ourselves to be, as a sort of way for brands to start taking action today while setting the longer term pathway towards sort of these principles of the circular economy.
Okay, thank you for that. Very lively exchanges on that question. And now if I could just move on to the next one, we have a question from N. Hughes. Moving up the waste management hierarchy might include design to avoid or reduce the creation of waste in the first place. Can we still involve currently informal workers in the circular economy as we move up the waste management hierarchy?
Sorry, I'd like
Not sure I understand the question actually. Could you repeat the question, Tanya?
Yeah, I'll just read it out again. The question goes, moving up the waste management hierarchy might include using designs to avoid or reduce the creation of waste in the first place. Can we still involve the currently informal workers in the circular economy as we move up the waste management hierarchy?
As in, is a question that can we have informal sector workers involved in the design stage? Is that how you interpret that question?
Yeah, that is what it would mean, Pavithra.
Okay.
That seems to be.
I understood it to mean can we have in an economy without waste? What do we do with informal waste pickers? How do they I guess, transition out of that
Well,
employment?
I think that question then goes for 2,100.
Yeah, exactly. Which is why I was thinking that there's always going to be waste. I mean, even if we move away from plastic or single-use plastic, there's always going to be material, I think, that needs to be recovered at its end of life. And I think informal waste ecosystems provide a great leverage point that we should use and incorporate into any solution for a circular economy, right? There is these existing grassroots logistical systems that in India today go from every door to collect material already and bring it into a supply chain. And I think we should use those existing logistical networks because they're quite efficient as they are today. Of course, there's a lot of ethicality problems that need to be hammered out immediately, I think, and in order to make these informal sectors more ethical and inclusive of the workers that they employ, I think. Yeah, but that's my thought.
Pranshu, did you want to take that?
No, I think it's a matter of then skilling. It is, and then do we call them even informal? The informality ends. Why do we have to call it? We are then calling, okay, these are, let's say, a type of people, who are unskilled. How do we then get them better? But that, for me, it's more of a skilling question rather than anything else at this point in time.
Right, and I think I have like sort of two takes on that. One is I don't know about the design phase, but workers who are in the waste management segregation piece now, like Pranshu said, there is scope to skill and move them up to. So if you're talking about electronics, to move them up to the repair, the refurbish, some of those areas, which is again like a skilling question. So I think it's they don't have to be out of jobs. They can move up the hierarchy that way into some of these inner loops that we talk about. But in terms of some other sectors, there's some very interesting realizations about how people that work at the end of the product life cycle in dismantling and disassembly have inputs to give in the design phase. So for instance, I think I was talking to someone about this whole remanufacturing idea. Which happens, there's more remanufacturing than we know about, kind of happens behind the scenes. But there's a lot of movement towards, some of the smaller SMEs that are involved in the end stage of that, giving feedback, back to the guys who are designing these engine cores and whatever it is, to say, these are some of the things you could do better in terms of making the product more amenable to remanufacturing, easier to disassemble, and so on. So there's like a lot of knowledge in that part of the value chain, and it's very disconnected from the design part. So there's a lot of, there's some movement beginning to happen in terms of bridging that gap. Sort of closing that loop, so to speak. But yeah, I think that's, I interpret that question to mean, how does the end of the value chain communicate with the beginning of the value chain? So that kind of would be my answer to that.
Definitely. So thank you for that. And now, as we're almost out of time, I will move on to one last question. And in answering that, maybe you could also make your closing remarks. And the question sort of goes back to the theoretical side of the discussion. What does ideal pre-competitive collaboration look like?
Pranshu, you're muted.
Sorry, did you say pre-competitive collaboration?
Pre-competitive or preemptive?
It says pre-competitive collaboration.
Okay.
I don't know, what does that mean?
Yeah.
Maybe I could start on that a little bit.
Because I was hoping you could shed some light on that. In your opening statements, you'd mentioned
Yeah, so I think sort of different models are emerging with this. There was like a pre-competitive R&D based collaboration that happened between a lot of I think FMCG brands, if I'm not wrong. To name a few, I think there was Unilever and Diageo and PepsiCo involved. I might be getting my names mixed up, but they're all sort of roughly in that FMCG space. They sort of co-invested in this other company that came up with the technology to make a fully paper-based bottle to carry beverages, right? And so Diageo, which makes your, I think, Johnny Walkers and all of that. I think it's a very interesting model. So that's like, they sort of co-funded that R&D. But in terms of actually using the bottles, I think what they're doing is they're using it in non-competitive lines. So for instance, Diageo uses it in their alcoholic stuff, and they're all FMCG, but they have non-competing lines of products, and they're going to use that paper-based bottle in these non-competing lines of products for the first, I think, 2 or 3 years after the rollout. I don't know what happens after that. But I think this might be like an interesting way to kind of collaborate with your competitors, but then also be able to tout your differentiation a little bit, at least for the first few years, right? That this is out in the market. That's kind of what I read into it. So that's sort of one area of pre-competitive collaboration. Another one I think is sort of, I think organizations like Fashion for Good are actually kind of looking at orchestrating some of this, right? Which is to get to kind of go from here's some innovation and do you want to work with an innovator, to do you as an industry want to work with this innovator? And we spoke to H&M on a podcast which is actually coming out very soon, who sort of echoed that same thought, right? Like when you want to work with an innovator and you want that innovator to scale, to be able to be in all of sort of your regions, or offer solutions across a large enough sort of geographic region and stuff, you need multiple players adopting that innovation. So that's sort of some of the areas where pre-competitive collaboration is happening. And I think the idea there is to either make the R&D, to co-invest in the R&D, or to make the adoption of innovation faster, and so on.
Thank you, Pavithra. I think we're almost out of time. So maybe if you'd like to make 30-second closing remarks, we could start with Aditya.
Sure. I don't have any closing remarks to say, but I think on the topic of sort of rethinking circular economy, I think just echoing something that was said earlier in the discussion as well, I think we need just a lot of innovation in the space across the board, from across the value chain, right from the sort of top of the value chain, redesign solutions to end of life solutions, and all the way in between. And I think to that end, I think it's important to think about things in a way that sort of sees each of these innovations not as competing with each other, but as more complementary, because each of these is needed, right? So I saw in some of the questions that I was seeing questions around design out waste versus recycling. I think the fact is that at least for the next 10 to 15 years, we're going to have an economy that is going to be at least not completely circular. And so it's important to think about not these as competing ideas, but as completely complementary, equally necessary solutions, right? So yeah, that's sort of the last thought that I had.
Okay, thank you, Aditya. Over to Pranshu.
Yeah, thank you. So for me, I think it is imperative that we keep in mind that we are in this decade of action. The decade has started at a very low note, but also at a high note from an environment point of view. I mean, I had never imagined that I would see blue skies, for example, in Delhi. Yet, it now, at least now I know that it is possible. And yes, some fundamental changes are required in the whole economy to make it happen, but it is possible. And a lot of things which I think none of us had ever dreamed of from a pure environmental, species recovery point of view, they seem suddenly doable. That if this happens, then it is doable. So I think what is imperative for us to remember is that this is the decade of action, and the next 5 years matter the most. After that, we may have, if we have to put in our efforts, this is the time to put in the best efforts, best models. Anything that has to be done in these next 5 years. And then scale up, do replications in very, very large systems in the next 5 years. Because after that, I don't think, there is a point of return, or, that is well documented now that we will reach the point of no return. And if we haven't solved it, then I mean, time's up. So what is critical is how do we, go from, first of all, from point of not even acknowledging the problem to acknowledging it, because that acknowledgement will suddenly drive conversations. I mean, why suddenly plastics, talk of the town? I mean, if you see in the last 1.5 years, everyone is talking plastics. Every organization, every global institution, all foundations globally, plastics suddenly out of nowhere in the last 1.5, 2 years is like everyone's top game. And it is because conversations have started. It has moved from the space of acknowledgement to action. And I think that is what we need to realize, that it is not just one category. We need to think of it at a very fundamental level and for the whole economy, at all product category levels. And so moving, so acknowledging, getting into conversations, because the moment we get into conversations around these topics, action will follow. Immediately it will follow, because too many people are talking, and it is no more a hush-hush topic or something that can be, you go and ask, okay, if there's a business case, I'll do something, and if not, sorry, walk out of my room. So those discussions have to stop, and that will only happen once there is enough conversation. So I think forums like these play a super critical role in enabling that conversations. And I think that would be my last point, at how do we reinvigorate these conversations so that they then drive real action at a grassroots level with all urgency in mind. Because we should not forget, this is the decade of action. This is that very tiny piece of time in our histories that will really change things dramatically.
Thank you, Pranshu. I see that we've already crossed our time, but to be fair, Pavithra, over to you if you could wrap up really quickly.
Right. And I think I'll just build on what Pranshu said. It is the decade of action, but I'll add a word. It's a decade of concerted action. We need collaboration. We need more consensus building so that we're all sort of headed in the right direction. We don't define our problems in our own silos and look at different non-concerted ways of solving them, because that's not going to get us anywhere. So, and to rethink this idea of competition as who are you competing against? I think those are sort of my 2 points to wrap up.
Thank you so much. So I would once again like to thank all our panelists for joining us today and for this very insightful discussion that we've had. Thanks again to everyone who's tuned in and for keeping the questions coming, for keeping the chat lively. For those of you who joined us for the first time today, the Rethinking Economics India Network is an organization run by a bunch of passionate individuals who are joined together by their collective urgency to build an ecosystem for pluralist economics in India by connecting university, civil society, and the private sector. This event was also co-organized with the Pali Project, which focuses on research-driven solutions for global agendas who want to connect students and professionals for mutually insightful discussions through youth conferences and events. And you can see that my colleagues have put in the links that you can definitely check out in the chat. Thank you so much for joining us. Have a great rest of the day.
Thank you guys for organizing this and inviting us here.
Yeah.
Thank you, Rethinking Economics.
Thank you.
And thank you, attendees, for joining on a Saturday evening to talk about circular economy. Very awesome.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.
Take care. Bye.